I'm Maria Carlson. I'm joined by my colleagues Sean, Mark, and Mario, and we'll get started now. So just to take you through what we'll be presenting today, we're going to go through some of the assumptions we've made in making these recommendations, then go through our selection criteria in making our recommendation for the regional hub, and then we're going to do a comparative analysis between the selection that we've made and what we think is sort of the biggest competitor, go through the advantages and disadvantages for this region, and then take your questions. So some of the assumptions that we've made are that all the potential costs for the rail are included in the projections that have been provided to us by you. Additionally, we have assumed that the construction of the rail will be completed by 2022. We think that is a reasonable assumption, and we will explain why as we go through the presentation. Additionally, using past precedent, we're assuming a greater national security risk for the East Coast due to proximity to Washington, D.C. and other high-profile cities, which has gone into our selection criteria. So we have selected California as the regional hub to pilot test the HSPR program. And the three sort of main areas that we used to make this determination were the public and social benefit. We thought that, benefiting the communities that will be affected by the rail is sort of the most important thing, and putting the American taxpayer dollars to best use. The environmental impact, because we know that it's going to be a huge political consideration going forward, as well as the cost considerations. And now Mark will bring you through each of those.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria. Now I'm going to briefly run through the three different selection criteria. The first one is public and social benefit. Because this is a pilot project and will be the only high-speed rail project implemented, at least in the foreseeable future, we wanted the pilot project to be created in an area that has the most need for one and has the biggest public and social benefit. So the first criteria for that would be increased connectivity. We want to connect populations of city centers. So the number of cities that are connected is really important in that matter. It's also important that the route is connected from city center to city center and that stops are not on the outskirts of a city center, because that's far more inefficient for passengers to then have to find alternative forms of transportation to find that link to the city center from the outskirts. Second, we want to increase mobility. It's important that passengers are able to arrive to their destinations at a far greater speed than the status quo, and also reduce congestion. That way, even though they're getting to the destination faster through high-speed rails, they can also get to their destination faster on the highway because they have less competition on the road. Lastly, in terms of economic impact, we recognize that large city centers receive a modest boost in economic development rather than the intermediate cities. In fact, intermediate cities might see their economic status decline and drain away and suffer an overall negative impact. And like we mentioned in our previous presentation, we want to look at other measures of economic impact, such as job creation, and we look at relative populations to evaluate them. Now, in terms of cost considerations, we've calculated the per mile cost and the per ridership cost, as you can see in the two charts. Now, although this provides an accurate visualization of the estimated cost per mile and ridership, it does not capture the economic benefit a high-speed passenger rail system would have on each of these corridors. For instance, it details the investments that would be made, but does not detail at all the return on investments. And Sean will soon demonstrate why we chose California and the Northeast to make our final cut, rather than the Northwest and Midwest, despite being far more expensive. And in terms of the speed efficiency, we calculated the increase in speed efficiency per dollar spent, which Sean will also get into in a moment. Lastly, the environmental impact. We actually placed the least importance on this criteria because high-speed rails have been evaluated as not being a very useful tool in curbing climate CO2 emissions. They actually have more CO2 emissions than conventional intercity trains, despite being far more environmentally efficient than private cars and air travel. So we primarily focused on the immediate environmental impact, such as laying down new track and having to clear forest in order to do so, and also looking at farmland and seeing the negative externalities that would be placed on people's livelihoods from forming new track.
So as Mark had mentioned, we determined it down and got it down to California versus the Northeast. We got it down to those two by looking at how many hubs were affected and also whether there was a core and regional aspect to what was going on. So in the Midwest as well as in the Northwest, we only saw regional, we didn't see any core. So we wanted to know the interplay between those two and how that would play out in our pilot program. So then once we were just comparing California and the Northeast, we looked at total cost. We see that it's $42 billion. We also know that there's a GO bond that's already been passed measures to have that money there. So we already know there's investment. And we already know that there's interest in California. In the Northeast, we know it's $117 billion. So there's a considerable difference there. In population estimates, looking at recent 2010 census data, we know that California is increasing. The population's increasing, and that also means the traffic congestion that they currently have is going to increase, and it's already bad in LA and San Francisco. So we looked at that. Then we looked at coordination and administrative feasibility. So California is one state, we all know that. In the Northeast, we're connecting multiple states. That means different authorities that we could be dealing with, different government practices. Each state could set up a different way of managing their track, and therefore that could lead to increased time, increased cost. Cities connected. We saw that in California, it's 10 cities that they were going to connect. In the Northeast, it's 8. Both have 5 major cities involved in that. But therefore, we have 5 extra smaller cities in the California connection, and we want to know how it spurs not just in the large cities like the Northeast, but in the smaller cities too, and how the economic incentives in those places are being increased. In addition, we want to look in the increase in speed efficiency. We are going from 79 miles per hour to 220 miles per hour. That's a 178% increase in speed. In the Northeast line, we're only increasing speed 44%. So we want to know what the difference is, and we view it as important to see such a big jump because we want to make these high speed. Also, the political investment. We know that there's political investment in California. In the Northeast, we know that there's trains set, but we're not exactly sure on the investment and the interest of the different states, all the different states. And then the environmental analysis, again, we, as Mark had mentioned, we're going to give both of those a check. So on that, we kind of view them as even. Thanks.
So I'm going to speak to the disadvantages and advantages of the project. And this is a criteria that kind of drove our decision-making process. So first, the disadvantages. It's a huge capital investment project. So we understand that since California, it's the only state that's putting forth the money, then it could be a huge risk financially, right? If the project potentially fails, which we hope doesn't happen, right? There's the possibility of national disasters. And I'm from California, so we deal with earthquakes all the time. So we can see the potential impact that it could have structurally and also financial impact as well. Maintenance costs, since, I mean, again, it's a one state, there's only one state dealing with the entire process, so they're going to bear most of the cost. So it could be quite costly. In terms of dealing with the long-term public support,
Well, we know that there is, political support for this in California already, so we're confident that, there will be support in the long term for this as well.
Yeah, there's also the issue of high costs, like we mentioned before. It's the third most expensive project from the list of the 4. So, and taking also into account the high risk, the potential of that as well. In terms of the advantages, like Sean mentioned briefly before, the political investment. We have seen that in California, there's been interest since the late 90s in investing in a high rail project like this. The single state coordination, I think it's going to help with the productivity, better data analysis, also dealing with the coordination in terms of the implementation, the planning, and running the program overall. Also, the core and regional tracks that has been mentioned before. We feel that in comparison to the Northeast, there's a decrease in national security issues. In terms of the precedent in DC, there's been examples of that happening in the past. Also, the decrease in traffic congestion and the substantive increase in speed that we mentioned before. It's 174%, and I think it's 44, the other one.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so now we're happy to take any questions that you guys have. Thank you.
So from an economic standpoint, we know that we want to support the rail industry, but we also know that there's a large reliance on the airline industry, which we've sort of rescued from bankruptcy recently in a lot of cases. So did you look at the likely, A, impact to the economic livelihood of the airlines, and B, their response to this proposed corridor in California?
Yes, we did. We found that people prefer different methods of transportation depending on the distance that they're going. So for short-term distances, they rely on cars and then small intercity transportation and buses. But for immediate range, within up to 400 miles, they prefer the high-speed passenger rail system. But still, they're always going to be relying on planes in the far distance travels, which most Americans rely on today for long-range distance.
The preferences are from Europe. That's a European preference or American?
That was an American. We found that from the sources that we were given in the research that we've done from the article.
So thinking about the Northeast, that's a megalopolis. Obviously, you've got tons of big cities. Even the smaller big cities in the Northeast are still quite large. You've got Baltimore and so on. Can you speak about the cities that would be hit? Those 10 cities that would be connected in the California example, and why why did those? So there's more cities, but why are those the cities? Because I could see an argument being made for like Baltimore, people wanting to live in Baltimore and travel to New York or DC quickly, but maybe not the places in between.
Totally. So here Sacramento is the state capital, so we want to be connected to that. We have LA, cultural hub. We have San Francisco and San Jose. So those are our tech hubs. And then in between that, we have like Bakersfield, Fresno, Riverside, San Diego. Great places to find students, to find college kids, to find hardworking young people, as well as older people work really and ready to go to work. And so in those areas, we determine that those are good because we do want to see the impact on the smaller cities. We do know, like Baltimore is a good sized city and it already has a lot of stuff going on. How is it going to impact Fresno with having a high-speed rail going through it? What's going to happen? Because we don't have that kind of data and we want to see it. So.
And also in terms of, although they are considered smaller cities, relatively speaking to the bigger cities, for example, Fresno and Bakersfield, they have populations of close to 500,000. So in terms of the access for the public, I think it's going to be a benefit, and considering the public benefit in that sense, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if I may, as we mentioned, there's going to be a larger increase in speed than the status quo within the California track than it would be in the Northeast, with that 170-something%. So it gives them more of an incentive to be able to travel intercity than the increased incentive that it would be in New England or in the northeastern states from what already exists. So it provides better interconnectivity in that area.
170 figures, that just compared to a car?
No, it's compared to the
To
prior
New England.
speed. So 79 to 220 divided by
Prior rail speed.
79.
It currently goes 79 miles per hour
Oh,
at the height of the trains, and now it's going.
Existing speed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Is there any, I have a question, is there any existing, like, I'd say, connectivity between these locations? Is there, the Northeast, I think of a logical flow from Boston to DC, makes sense to me. I wonder how you factor into it. Is there a natural migration of people between these cities, or is there a workflow process? Is it an agricultural hub, which wouldn't really affect high-speed rail? So I just don't know how you would factor in the piloting component of this between what seems to me to be very disparate geographic locations.
So when you look at the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Jose, there are existing railroad tracks in there, what they call Caltrain. So we would be able to take advantage of that. There's also lines that connect from the Bay Area to Sacramento, and also going down to Fresno. So there is the existing infrastructure in place to take advantage of those opportunities.
But part of what went into our analysis was that while there is this existing infrastructure that we could take advantage of, it's much less sort of a presence than Amtrak is on the East Coast. So we were, thinking that it'd be less disruption for changing the transportation methods in this area than it would be in the Northeast.
Thank you.
Thank you.